The 1998 movie Saving Private Ryan, which is loosely based on a true account of a family that had lost several brothers in the opening days and months of the Second World War, Tom Hanks plays Captain John Miller. And one of the little subplots that's kind of going on throughout the entire movie is that his past history is a mystery to his platoon. That he's led men through training, through D-Day on Omaha Beach. He's helped them to capture different fields, and as they're going through all this, they're just kind of curious, who is this man that is leading us? So much so that at least the fictional account says that there's a pool going on with all the soldiers that's racked up a couple $1,000s to try to figure out what did he do back in the United States before he was just our captain. And finally, there's a breaking point where it seems like everybody's about to dissolve and the whole platoon's about to fall apart. And he just intervenes and says, I'm an English teacher. He says, and where I'm from, that makes sense, but over here it doesn't seem to make a lot of sense at all. But I'm a high school English teacher. That's what I do. But obviously, he was called and given greater responsibility and authority, and so his life took a different trajectory. Why did that come to my brain? One, I'm a movie nerd, but two, in the first reading, the prophet Amos is sent from the northern kingdom to the southern kingdom, and he's called to preach in Bethel, which will become Bethlehem, that he goes and he preaches about turning back to true worship. And they reject him and say, get out of here, you prophet. You go back to wherever you came from. And Amos replies with, listen, I'm no prophet. I'm a farmer. He says, I'm a dresser of sycamores, and I have flocks that I tend. But it was while I was doing that God called me and sent me here. That's why I'm here. And it shows, again, that we need to view our lives through the lens of how God sees it, more than how we define it or how the world wants to define it. We are not defined by our occupation. We're not defined by what we can consume, what we can achieve or obtain. It doesn't define our personhood. Jesus Christ defines our personhood. God the Father bestows a dignity upon us that he gives us that which the world cannot. By St. Paul in the second reading today, if you realize it, he's actually talking about God the Father. And what does he say? God the Father has shown us his mercy and has called us to himself. Who does Jesus call in the Gospel of Mark? It says, those whom he desires. Jesus calls those whom he desires. And before he sends them out to cast out demons and to cure the sick, it says when he calls the 12, it says he calls those whom he wanted so that they could be with him. And then he could send them out. That the first and primary thing that God desires for us is intimacy. That's what defines us. They're not known as, the casters of demons. They're not known as those who perform mighty deeds. They're known as his friends. They're known as his disciples. That they're in relationship with him. And so it is for all of us. That we have to pray that we can first receive that call to divine intimacy with God. What does that look like? What does it look like to be a friend of God? This was something that I was talking to a spiritual director with yesterday. And I said, well, I don't think it means that you're going to sit on the couch tomorrow with Jesus and hope that the Cardinals beat the Cubs, right? Some things even Jesus can't do. No, I'm kidding. At least we're not Pittsburgh. All right. But what does it mean, to be a friend of God? C.S. Lewis defines friendship as two people standing side by side looking at a shared goal or having a shared experience. To be a friend with God, it means that I just invite God into my daily experience. and allow my life again then to be viewed through his eyes, through the way that he sees it. And it changes everything. Because again, Peter could have seen himself as a failed fisherman, but that's not how God saw him. St. Paul, he writes that his day job is that he had to make tents to make ends meet. Greece is a very hot place, so he's a maker of tents. But he's not known as a maker of tents, he's known as the greatest apostle ever. Mother Teresa isn't known as just a very kind healthcare worker. She's known as a saint who radiated the love of God into the world. And so if we invite God into our daily lives and just say, Jesus, help me to see what you see, whether it's at home, with our children, with my spouse, with my coworkers, when I go out with my friends, help me to see what you see. Help me to see myself not as a dresser of sycamores or just as somebody that earns a paycheck or is trying to consume something in this world, but help me to see myself first and foremost as a beloved child of God, whom after spending time with you is sent out into the world. And that by my daily actions then, as I offer them up, as they become a living sacrifice of praise to you, actually bring about your kingdom. There's a little story about somebody walking down a road, and this person sees three people breaking big rocks into small rocks. You might have heard this one before. He asks the first person, "What are you doing?" "Isn't it obvious? I'm breaking big rocks into small rocks." Goes down the road a little further. Somebody's breaking big rocks into small rocks. "What are you doing?" "I'm earning a living, making ends meet." Walks down further. Somebody else breaking big rocks into small rocks. "What are you doing?" "I'm building a cathedral." It's all the way that we view it. Lots of us, I feel like, in our daily existence, feel like, I'm just breaking big rocks into small rocks. God sees you building a kingdom. God sees you building a kingdom in your daily moments, in your daily lives, if you open yourselves up to his grace and allow him, as St. Paul says then, to bestow the fullness of his Spirit upon you. So that then it's not just that we can see our lives as God sees it, but we start to live it as he would have us live it. And what does that look like? That in our baptisms we're anointed as priests, prophets, and kings. To be a priest, what does that mean? What do priests do? You guys think that a lot, I know. What do those guys do all day anyway? Say mass in the morning, go play golf? I don't know. What does a priest do? Fundamentally, a priest is someone that offers up prayer and sacrifice to God on behalf of others. Jesus is the perfect high priest because he himself is the offering, and he reveals the love of God the Father back to us. So as we are baptized and we go out into our daily lives, what do we have the opportunity to do? To offer our actions and our very lives as an offering for the sake of others. I must decrease that he may increase. So I can die to myself, that God's grace can become alive and activated in somebody else's life. That any time that you offer up a prayer or sacrifice for somebody else, you are sharing in the priesthood of Jesus, who reveals God the Father's love to the world. And that is done 1,000 times a day. And the smallest little things, big rocks, small rocks, building the cathedral of God's kingdom in the world. Don't underestimate the hidden acts of kindness, the kind words spoken, the invisible deed done for the sake of another. God sees that as your sanctity. That's how you become a saint of Chesterfield, Missouri. To be a prophet, it doesn't mean that we foretell the future. It means that we're able to share in love what is true and good and beautiful. And that becomes more and more difficult in a society which no longer has Christian ideology as its foundation. We are beyond that now in our country. And so it becomes even more of an impetus for us as a people of faith to hold up the dignity of the human person, created in the image and the likeness of God, and everything that flows from that. It's what it means to have every single person to be a beloved son or daughter of God. Everything flows from that. And people don't believe it anymore. They think that we're just cosmic consumers sent here randomly for no other reason than self-fulfillment. And that we have the obligation by the gospel to go out and to say, no, there's a greater dignity to each and every one of us that should define all that we do. And lastly, as kings and queens, what does that mean? Well, it doesn't mean that we get to dictate and point fingers and say, move that there and you go do that. It means that we share in the dominion of Christ, which means that I first and foremost have authority over myself, my own thoughts, my own feelings, my own desires, and I'm able to name these things and allow Christ's grace to be triumphant within me, so that I become the man or the woman that God calls me to be, that I'm not easily swayed by what is trending in society, but I'm rooted and grounded in truth, and that I can help people to be rightly oriented towards the gospel, towards, again, what is true and good and beautiful. Big rocks into small rocks, building God's kingdom. You don't need to travel the world to be a saint. You need to just invite God into every daily action and moment. That's how St. Paul could say, pray always. He doesn't mean sit in a pew all day long. He means invite God in all day long. Be aware of his presence in your life. Let that be what defines us. And then God will give us all that we need. God makes up for all that is lacking within us. Take no food, no money in your belt. The only thing, oddly, that Jesus says you need to be a good disciple is comfortable shoes, because you're not going to be sitting still all day long. Isn't that something? No food, no money, no walking stick, no nothing of that, but, put some comfortable shoes on. Get a good pair of Dockers so you can get out there and keep on moving. With this thought, I would love for us as a Catholic people to reclaim obituaries in a new way. You read obituaries, what you see is most people, again, we always begin with our relationships with others, which is a good and holy thing. We're defined by our relationships that we have. Beloved spouse, mother, aunt, friend, generous person. That's beautiful and good. But here's what I would love to start to see. And so I'm going to start it here at Ascension today. This is the first time that you're going to hear it. I would love to see that in my obituary would say, beloved child of God, priest, prophet, and king. Everything else is just in the details. He broke big rocks into small rocks and tried to become a saint in the process.